On a hill overlooking London, where ivy strangles stone angels and the dead rest uneasy, lies a place where history and horror walk hand in hand. By day, it's a Victorian marvel, ornate tombs and towering obelisks basking in sunlight. But by night, the shadows tell older, darker tales of witches, of rituals, of a vampire said to haunt crypts. This isn't just a cemetery. It's a portal to the past, and maybe something far worse. Welcome to Highgate. You're throwing me off with your reactions, man. I'm in character.
Sorry, my man.
Sorry. Welcome to Highgate. The gates are open, but not everything wants you to leave.
Zumundous.
And welcome to Zumundous podcast, episode 30. I'm Doolin.
And I'm Greg.
And of all of our, I want to say tens of listeners, our fews of listeners, we do have one that is a really good friend of mine, very loyal listener. You know, he watches it just because we put it out, but also because he's really into this kind of stuff, man. And that's my friend Chris from overseas. We've given him a couple shout outs on the show before. And
hi, Chris.
And I hope you're doing well, man. But Chris wanted us to talk about this, man. Chris lives over there in England, and he wanted us to touch on an old English legend, and that's the legend of Highgate Cemetery. So we're gonna get into it, man. There's a lot of history there, in terms of not only just the architecture and the structure or whatever, but it has a really dark history of the occult and strange happenings and sightings, and is also said to be some of the basis for where Bram Stoker got the some of the story elements from Dracula. Mm-hmm. So, so one part Vlad Tepes, one part Highgate Cemetery. Put them together in a blender, and you have Dracula. But let's talk about it, man. So this is Highgate Cemetery, and it's perched atop Highgate Hill in North London. So this is it's a little bit more than just a final resting place. This is a what you could call a gothic time capsule of sorts. Mm-hmm. Of Victorian ambition, and it's steeped with supernatural lore, really creepy place. So this was first thought up in 1839, the cemetery, as part of what they called the Magnificent Seven, not to be confused with the movie Magnificent Seven.
Such a good movie.
Yeah, it is a good movie. I like all the versions of that movie, actually.
Me too.
But it was part of the Magnificent Seven cemeteries built to ease kind of London's overflowing graveyards. Of course, you have any place that's densely populated like London, even back there in the 1800s, people die. That's just, then you have to do something with the bodies. And you got it. You can't just throw it in the trash. You got to do so. You got to burn it or bury it. You can't just throw it away.
And they weren't burning them yet. So
and I guess maybe they weren't. Well, I think that was like a Christian thing. Like Christians didn't believe in cremation. Like I know my grandmother, when she passed, probably about 3 or 4. Oh gosh, no, it's been about 5 years now. But my grandmother, very devout Baptist. Do not cremate me. Like, okay, we'll put you in the ground because that's what you want.
And that's understandable because religious people spend their entire lives
fearing hellfire. Yeah,
and the last thing they want to hear is that when you die, we're gonna set you on fire. So I can understand that.
Yeah. So I mean, you gotta think this is this is the Victorian era of London. Probably very heavily religious. Not a lot of people wanted to be cremated, most likely. I don't even think they were doing that. I don't even think that was a practice back then.
Came a little bit later, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you gotta have land for all these people that die, and it's a densely populated area, so they had overflow. And so this was a solution to that. But this particular cemetery, Highgate, was designed by architect Stephen Geary with landscaping artist David Ramsey. And this, like, it's kind of silly to say, but this was like the fashionable place to, when I die, I'm going to Highgate Cemetery. And they're like, ooh, fancy. You won't get to enjoy it. Like, what kind of provisions do they have there?
What grand plans you have?
Yeah, exactly. But it's a little side story. There was a very famous cemetery in New Orleans that I went to go visit a couple summers ago, and I forget what the name of it is off the top of my head, but one of the stops you have to this cemetery is not open to the public. You have to purchase a tour to go in.
Okay.
And one of the stops on this famous cemetery is the future resting place of Nicolas Cage.
Oh, I've heard about this.
And they're just and this is where Nicolas Cage will someday be. And I'm like,
wow,
is he here now? No, okay then.
I love the idea of preparing.
But it's one of those things just like Nicolas Cage wanted his remains placed in this very famous, prestigious cemetery.
Yeah.
In this place, this was kind of the same thing. A lot of people would book their spot at Highgate Cemetery.
Sure.
I don't really understand that, but it's not for me to say.
We have a whole history of civilizations really.
Well, yeah, the Egyptians. Yeah.
The Egyptians, for example, lavish tombs filled with riches and gold that they were never going to use, but just in case.
Well, Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that because this thing, with its architecture and its landscape and stuff like that, was actually decorated with Egyptian columns and things like that. So a little nod back to those that time where it was to be buried was it was an event. You're being ferried to the afterworld, and you would need to make sure you go in style.
Your final resting place was going to be lavish and luxurious.
Yeah, exactly. So they had ornate mausoleums in this thing. They still do. And then and it's all amongst beautiful, lush greenery. It is actually it's very pretty. It's
people would apparently go to the cemetery not only to visit their loved ones, but it was a great spot to go for a walk. See the sights.
It's weird, man. Whenever Charisse and I go on vacation to any place that has some kind of history, she's like, "All right, I booked us a tour at the cemetery." I'm like, why? She's like, "Because there's history there."
There is, and
okay. I get that, but also there's something just puts me at unease walking through the cemetery because it's it's. You're looking at
there's a lot of dead bodies. Yeah,
there's a lot of dead bodies there, but also it's you're really you can't walk through a cemetery and not think about your mortality, which is something that we're all aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we push it to the back of our minds because we don't want to sit there and think about that all day. You
right.
know?
One of these days, I'm going to be here.
Yeah, exactly. And you see oh man, this guy lived for 79 years. And he's been dead for 82 years, but he had an entire 79 years on this planet, which is way more than I've been here. And this is it. This is all that remains of him. It's a name on a plate, and that's it.
I still remember going to the cemetery for the first time when I was very little, and my parents telling me, "Well, don't step on the actual stones that are there." And I was like, "Why?" And they're like, "Well, because that would be disrespectful."
True,
and
it's a fair point.
But even as a child, my first thought was I don't think they're going to care.
Yeah, I know. As a child, you don't fully get it, but
exactly.
Now it's just it's a respect thing.
Of course,
obviously,
of course, absolutely.
I mean, I think there's one. I was taking a picture of Charisse, and I was backing up, and she's like, "You're standing on a grave." I'm like, "Oh shit, sorry, Amelia Watkins. I'm sorry."
And that's why Amelia Watkins
died in 1946. I'm sorry.
That's why she haunts you to this day.
But yeah, I got off.
Ancestor of Frederick Theodore Watkins.
No, that's why that name. I was just trying to come up with a last name. That's why it popped in there. That's a character he plays on the other podcast. But I won't plug it too much.
Tune in on July 7th.
Yes, absolutely. But like a lot of Victorian marvels, Highgate eventually fell into ruin after World War II. So. World War II, especially over there in England, everyone fell on hard times, man.
Sure.
It was a rough time. I know, United States felt it, and England was no different. We were fighting the same war, obviously. So they didn't have any maintenance staff, and funds to run this place was dried up, and then the cemetery was completely abandoned by the 1960s. So
all the corpses got up and left.
Yeah, they're like, I want my money back.
Going to a better cemetery.
Taking my unlife elsewhere.
I don't want to belong to any cemetery that would have me as a member.
Thank you, Groucho. But by that point, by the 1960s, so we're going about 20 years after World War II, everything was overgrown. The gravestones were toppled over, probably from vandals, if I had to guess. And the once very beautiful, pristine catacombs took on kind of an eerie, almost cinematic quality, so you walk into this place where it was once lush and beautiful and green and well kept. Now it just looks kind of, I would say, post-apocalyptic. So not only does it remind you of death, but it reminds you of like how fragile our civilization is, so it's.
I always find it ironic when a cemetery begins to decay because that's what's happening to the people.
Well, I mean, it's, everything's going to fall into ruin one day. You know what I mean? Like,
not my house.
Yeah, not this house.
It's gonna be great.
Yes, your house will one day like fall into decay and probably be torn down, and something will be built up over it. But we don't think that far ahead because we're not there. But so locals at this point in the 1960s, this once beautiful abandoned cemetery, they start to spread stories amongst themselves about this creepy cemetery, about figures in robes that were out there performing black satanic rituals.
As you do.
Yeah. And according to the locals that lived there at the time, spectral faces and banshee wails became part of the nighttime ambience. So like in banshee wails, I believe banshee is a ghost from Celtic folklore,
from
I think.
Irish mythology.
Yeah, from Irish mythology. So I mean, they're in that area and stuff. So banshee is said to be a spirit whose screech would foretell someone's death.
Yep, harbingers of death.
Yep,
Absolutely,
exactly. So they're hearing screams and they're like banshee wails, automatically banshee wails. But that went with the dark robed figures that were apparently performing rituals in the cemetery. So really creepy stuff, man. But the place became just a magnet at that point for ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and basically just anybody drawn to the paranormal. Like, nowadays, you have places with a lot of history, and you have, ghost hunters and things like that. Like any like tourist town, like I'll give you like St. Augustine and Savannah are a couple that come to mind. Key West is another one. Are all places that we've gone that have a lot of history. And then, my girlfriend's immediately like, ghost tour. We're going on a ghost tour. She loves cemetery. She loves the macabre, man. I don't know. I don't get it. You wouldn't think it to look at her. But but then came the vampire.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun. So in 1970 in Highgate Cemetery, there began reports of a, quote, tall, dark figure just kind of gliding around the cemetery. And the word spread all throughout London pretty quickly. And according to the stories, clocks stopped, animals ran out of the cemetery, foxes would just turn up dead, and this entity, whatever it was eventually dubbed the Highgate Vampire, who was believed to be a Romanian nobleman who practiced black magic. We're sounding a little bit like Vlad, you know what I mean?
Buddy Vlad.
Yeah, I mean, well, Vlad wasn't in this part of the world. Obviously, he was over in Romania, I think. Yeah. But they would believe he's a medieval Romanian nobleman. I mean, like if that's not Vlad the Impaler, I don't know who is, man. But legend says that this Romanian nobleman had a coffin that was shipped to England in the 18th century and interred at what would become Highgate.
Geez.
Sounding a little bit like a story we know. A little bit.
Bram Stoker got his ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so,
interesting.
But they say that he laid dormant there in the cemetery until allegedly, so the story goes, the satanic rituals allegedly stirred him from his slumber.
Okay.
So, I mean, it really is starting to sound like the basis for the Dracula story, man.
Well, it's interesting, the idea.
But wait a minute. This is 1970. Dracula was written way before that, so this couldn't have been Bram Stoker's inspiration. I think they were taking a page out of Bram Stoker's book, because when was Bram Stoker's Dracula written?
It was going to be in the late early 1900s, something like that.
Yeah, something along those lines. 1897.
Aha, I was close.
1897. So this is 100 years after Dracula. So it was almost like when I was checking out some of this stuff, I was like, oh, it's the basis for Bram Stoker's Dracula, and then I'm like, wait a minute, 1970. Nope, that ain't adding up. All right, so I feel like the story of the medieval Romanian is like, that has to be like a tall tale. They're like, from this book I read.
There was as I was doing a little bit of research on this, I don't remember everything that I read, but I believe there was an occurrence where at one point a coffin broke open and there was a young lady who had been interred there for about 7 years.
Yeah.
But it didn't look like there had been any decay whatsoever. Sorry about that.
All right.
It didn't look like there had been any decay whatsoever. And I think that might have stoked the imagination of our dear author. Again, the idea of opening a coffin and your corpse being there just as pristine and perfect as when you were buried.
Because that does happen to Lucy in...
Yeah, the character of Lucy in Dracula.
Dracula,
She is buried and she does arise from the grave and she is hunting children, basically. And
as a vampire is wont to do.
As you were wont to do. And when they eventually... go to her grave, her mausoleum or wherever where she's laid to rest. They see her lying there, and she looks absolutely beautiful. But of course, she is a child of the devil at that point.
Yeah.
Pristine looks, and so I think there was an influence there.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of interesting. So this thing actually got whipped up into a media frenzy in 1970. So it doesn't just happen on the internet; it happened back then too in 1970. Not too long before we were born, but. On Friday the 13th, 1970, the media-fueled feud led to vampire hunts as mobs stormed the cemetery in search of this vampire or the specter or whatever you want to call it. These mobs, angry mob. We haven't had a good angry mob in a long time. An angry mob climbed over the gates of the walls in search of the undead, and months later... the charred, headless body of a woman was found near the catacombs, which sounds like a murder.
I was going to say, I think that mob committed murder.
Yeah, they had murder in 1970. That was a thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it could have been the mob that did it. Maybe like they found a witch burner kind of thing, because that sounds more feasible. Or maybe it was just a sick, twisted serial killer that did that and just like, I'll just dump the body here.
I just like that it was an angry mob. Like, it wasn't just that all these people were like-minded and they wanted to find a vampire or evidence of the supernatural. They were pissed at this thing and they wanted justice and they were going to have it.
I could just see it where it's like, it's the mob standing there like, we have to kill the vampire. Like, okay, question before we go in.
Yeah.
Has any of you seen the vampire?
What?
No, but I read it in the paper.
Clearly there's a vampire. The newspapers.
The newspaper said it. It must be true. I don't know why that 1970s London gentleman sounded like he had a New England accent, but the newspaper said it. See, this is how we talk in London in the 1970s. See,
I am a citizen of England, even though I sound like
John F. Kennedy was there.
Say chowder.
Chowder.
That's a little Simpsons reference for you.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Back when The Simpsons was funny. But anyway, moving forward. Mob mentality, never a good thing. Somebody's probably going to end up dead, and they're probably not a vampire.
Well, yeah, probably not. But,
well, I mean, who knows? Maybe there was a vampire, and they just didn't find it.
Well, there was. I mean, this went so crazy that the city called for a public exorcism of the cemetery itself.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, like, I don't have any more information on that, but I wonder, like, how many, like, did they have teams of exorcists at that point? Or was it just, like, one guy where they stood at the gate and they're just like...
Every exorcist that you can find in the area and bring them to here. And the fact that this was sanctioned by the local government or just like...
Local government / church or whatever.
Get them in there.
Get them in there. You know, if nothing else, it'll make the people feel better. Yeah, we exorcise the cemetery. This house is clear.
More than likely. It's like, all right, is this going to calm you assholes down and keep you from,
decapitating and burning people?
Yeah, all right, fine. We'll do an exorcism. Ooh.
Domine Patri Spiritus Sanctum,
and gone.
Yeah, guys, we took care of it, guys.
So easy. Oh no, it was so hard, but we did it. It's just so very difficult.
Well, there was two men that claimed to have really seen the vampire, and accusations of Satanism was running rampant. Grave desecrations continued to happen, and even threats of this is weird, a magician's duel, and. Awesome. So there was two men that were like basically claiming that they had the real account of the vampire legend, and they were going to be the first one to slay the vampire, which they were also threatening to duel each other with magic. So
Amazing.
you know what? I have a speculation on that. I
Okay.
think it was probably like two rival illusionists and they were just trying to out stunt each other with like publicity stunts, because that's how I'm reading this.
It initially started with them pulling rabbits out of their hats and throwing the rabbits at each other, and then graduated to more sophisticated forms
It's
of
a magician's
sorcerism.
duel. Yeah.
I just keep thinking of the moment in Arrested Development where they talk about the Guild of Magicians, and it's just the picture of them and one of them holding on the side. We demand to be taken seriously, even though they're all dressed as wizards and sorcerers and such. But very interesting. So
Neither one, spoiler alert, neither one of them ever staked a vampire. That didn't actually happen.
Probably not. And I'm not saying that I don't believe in, things like that, or, I'm just saying that I don't believe these two people.
Yeah. Well, I think people definitely probably saw something.
They saw something,
and it's
yeah.
not entirely out of the realm of possibility that there were occultists in the graveyard. But, especially at a time like that, this is, the 1960s to the 70s, and you were around in the 80s, and I've talked before about the satanic panic of the 1980s. Especially being an avid Dungeons and Dragons player. I grew up in kind of a religious household. Yeah. And my mom freaked out when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons because she's like, it's Satanism. I'm like, it's really not, Mom.
I was going to say, is the devil involved in Dungeons and Dragons at all?
Devils. Devils and evil gods.
So creatures.
So, they're demonic
figures of fantasy.
Yeah, figures of fantasy. Exactly. Yeah.
But not somebody proclaiming to be the ultimate devil, Satan,
right.
Or anything that we know from the Catholic religion.
Yeah, well, I could probably do an entire episode on like the satanic panic of the 1980s and early 90s.
Tune in next week for the satanic panic.
We could for sure, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting, man, because beyond the ghost stories and vampire tales, it's still home to over 170,000 souls.
Wow,
buried across 37 acres.
That is a hell of a cemetery.
Some of the just a little fun fact for you here: some of the residents you can find there: Karl Marx, George Eliot, scientist Michael Faraday, and George Michael. George Michael's there. I didn't know that. All right.
Oh,
interesting. So yeah, man. Hey, burial plots are still available, by the way. If you
all right, I'm gonna look into it.
If you're not cheap and you want to get shipped overseas after death, and you too can be laid to rest there in Highgate Cemetery where the vampires play.
I'm gonna call and make an appointment tomorrow.
Yeah. So sometimes Keith and I would like to sort of end on a note of you think it's feasible, debunked, or more information needed? I would say, if I had to guess, for everything that I know of this story, from the reading I did and from the videos I watched and everything like that, it really seems to be like it was kind of a tall tale that kind of started with some people saw some weird stuff. Maybe they saw some creepy people hanging out there, and it gets built up and it gets told to somebody else, gets told to somebody else. The media gets a hold of it. And, it's like, we see social media now, and, clickbait runs rampant, but that's not really a new thing with the spawning of the internet. It used to be
mob
mob mentality, headline bait, and for whatever reason, the media had a good story on their hands, and they ramped it up so much that they whipped the people into a frenzy.
Yeah, people were buying their papers. So.
I know, I know people like to talk today about, misinformation on the internet, and that's a big thing, but that's not a new thing, man. It's been happening for years and years. Not. And why? Probably just so they could sell more papers, Absolutely. There's another story about the Highgate vampire coming out. Shit, I better get down to the stop and pick up, to the corner shop and pick up another copy of the newspaper so I can find out what's happening. And it's probably just, it's like, well, I talked to a guy who had a cousin who says that he definitely saw a vampire floating around at 2 a.m. on this day. So I tend to think of this one is, the stuff about like the vampire sightings and stuff like floating around like that. I highly doubt it.
I mean, it's I don't think so either. But I mean, to your point, newspapers are going to sell a lot faster when you feature stories of the undead and creatures and such, more so than the local schoolhouse is going to get repainted. Yeah, no one's running down to the corner store to buy a newspaper to read about that. Yeah. But the latest sighting of the Highgate vampire or such, I mean, whether or not you believe it or not, it's a fun story to read. So
Yeah.
it's
a fun story to read, but not without its consequences, I think. So,
No, absolutely. Eventually, people will take it to a point where they then storm the cemetery and then headless decapitated. That's the same thing.
Yeah.
Burnt bodies are found. And again, as you said, probably a murder was committed. But I believe in the possibility of the supernatural and such. I don't believe in this particular instance.
No, yeah, I think, yeah. So, Chris, man, thanks for sending that topic our way. It's a great story.
Yeah.
It really is. And I try to keep an open mind on a lot of stuff, but I think this one, if I had to guess, I think is mostly just mob mentality, sort of tall tale, kind of built up over the years. Probably not much there, if I had to guess.
Mob mentality topped with a magician duel, in which one of the magicians claimed that his assistant was possessed by the vampire and turned into a giant spider.
Yeah, of course.
I don't think any of that happened.
Did that happen? Or you're just being hyperbolic for fun?
No, that apparently that was a thing.
Oh, okay. All right. That was apparently a thing. That's good to know. Well, guys, whether you are drawn to the Highgate Cemetery for its stunning Victorian architecture, its celebrity roster, or the lure of lingering spirits, one thing's for sure, the dead there might not be silent. For Zumundous, I'm Doolin.
And I'm Greg.
And we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. I'm gonna go get my spot at the Highgate Cemetery, man. I can't wait. I'm gonna get to chill with Dracula.
I don't know. I heard a friend of mine was on hold for like 2 hours. He couldn't even get through to make the.
I think you just do email reservations now, right?